Claude responded. My son-in-law's briefcase was already open on my kitchen table when I walked in from the barn, and for just a second, before he snapped it shut, I saw the deed. My son-in-law's briefcase was already open on my kitchen table when I walked in from the barn, and for just a second, before he snapped it shut, I saw the deed to my machine shop sitting right there next to his laptop. My daughter didn't even flinch. She just smiled at me the way you'd smile at a dog you were about to put down. 2 nights later, sitting across from a federal magistrate in a courtroom I had no business being in, I watched that same woman's face go the color of wet paper when the magistrate leaned toward his microphone and said, in a voice that cracked right down the middle, "Wait, I know this man." Nobody in that room, including my own daughter, understood who they were looking at. Not yet. My name is Walter Odom. I'm 68 years old, and for 31 years I ran metal through lathes and mills in a shop outside Toledo, Ohio, the same shop my father built with his own 2 hands after he came home from Korea. If you're settling in with a coffee right now, or maybe it's the middle of the night where you are and you can't sleep, go ahead and tell me in the comments what town you're writing from. I like knowing who's sitting with me while I tell this. And if this story is the kind that stays with you, hit that subscribe button, because there's plenty more where this came from. It started on a gray Tuesday in October, 4 months back. My wife Carol has been gone 6 years now, taken by a heart that gave out on her while she was hanging laundry in the backyard, and since then the shop has been the only thing that gets me out of bed some mornings. I built Odom Precision Machining into something real. 40 employees at our peak, contracts with 2 aerospace suppliers. I was proud of it, prouder than I probably let myself admit, and when my knees finally gave out on the shop floor 2 years ago, I made the decision that would nearly cost me everything. I handed the books over to my son-in-law, Marcus. Marcus married my daughter Renee 9 years ago. He came into our family with a business degree from some school back east, and a smile that never seemed to reach past his teeth. I never much cared for him, if I'm being honest with you, but Renee loved him, and I loved Renee, so I swallowed my instincts the way you do. When I stepped back from day-to-day operations, Marcus took over as general manager. Renee handled the books on paper, but everyone in that shop knew Marcus was really running things. I trusted them. They were my blood. I told myself that 100 times. That Tuesday, I drove down to the shop just to sit in my old office and go through some retirement paperwork, something I'd been putting off. My longtime bookkeeper, Sheila, who'd worked for me since 1994, pulled me aside in the break room with a look on her face I hadn't seen since the day we almost lost the aerospace contract. She told me, very quietly, that the shop's line of credit at First Heritage Bank had been maxed out for 3 months. Not just maxed out, in default. The bank had sent 2 notices to the shop's registered address, and both of them had been signed for and never mentioned to her. I felt something cold drop straight through my chest. I had personally wired $110,000 into the shop's operating account just 8 weeks earlier, money from Carol's life insurance policy that I'd been saving for exactly this kind of emergency, specifically so Marcus could pay down that line of credit and free us up for a new equipment purchase. He'd sat across from me at Sunday dinner and told me, with that same flat smile, that it was handled, done. I shouldn't worry my head about it anymore. I called Renee from the parking lot, my hands not quite steady on the phone. She picked up on the 5th ring, the sound of a restaurant kitchen clattering behind her voice. "Dad, I'm at a client lunch. Can this wait?" I told her it could not wait, that I'd just learned our line of credit was in default, and the bank was talking about calling the loan. There was a pause, long enough that I could hear ice clinking in a glass. "Dad, calm down," she said, in that voice she used to use when I'd forget where I put my truck keys. "Marcus handles all of that. You're probably confusing an old statement with a new one. We'll come by the house tonight and walk you through it." They came by around 8. Marcus wore one of his tailored jackets, even though it was just family, and Renee carried a bakery box like she was bringing me a peace offering. I set the bank's default notice on my kitchen table between us, the red stamped letters facing up. "Explain this to me," I said. Marcus barely glanced at it. He leaned back in my chair, my father's chair, and told me the bank's compliance department was famously slow, that these letters were routine and often generated in error, that he'd already spoken with our loan officer and cleared the whole thing up weeks ago. When I asked him to show me the confirmation, the paper trail, anything, He and Renee traded a look. That look, I'd seen it on the faces of men who'd shorted me on steel deliveries for 30 years. It's the look of somebody deciding whether the lie is going to hold. "Dad, you've been forgetting things," Renee said, her hand landing on my forearm like she was comforting me, instead of accusing me. "Last month you left the space heater running in the shop office overnight. Sheila found it. You could have burned the whole building down." I stared at her. I have not used a space heater in that office in over a year. Not since I had the furnace replaced. I know that like I know my own name. But for one terrible second, standing in my own kitchen, I doubted myself. I doubted 31 years of running heavy machinery without a single serious accident. And then the doubt cracked apart, and something colder took its place. Because I realized, standing right there with the coffee going bitter in my mouth, that my daughter was lying to my face, deliberately, and doing it with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed it. Here's what they didn't know about me, and what I hadn't thought about myself in a long time. Before I inherited the shop from my father, before the 40 employees and the aerospace contracts, I spent 6 years as a Marine Corps criminal investigator, the kind of work that teaches you to read a liar's face better than most cops ever learn to. I put that part of myself away when Carol and I started our family. But it doesn't leave you. It just goes quiet. I let my shoulders sag. I told them maybe they were right, that the grief had been heavier than I let on, that I'd try to rest more. Marcus stood up, buttoning his jacket, satisfied. "Don't worry about the bank, Harrison. I'll call them Monday and get it sorted." He didn't even use my right name. Renee kissed my cheek and told me not to skip my vitamins. As their car pulled out of my driveway, I stood at the window with my hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from something old and sharpened waking back up inside me. The next morning, Renee showed up before 7 with a small amber bottle. She told me, "Doctor, Ferris had prescribed something new, a supplement to help with focus and memory, given everything I'd been through." She poured my coffee and set the pill beside it with a soft, patient smile, the kind you'd give a child. Something in the back of my skull, some old instinct trained into me by men who'd interrogated murderers for a living, told me not to swallow it. But she was my daughter. I told myself I was becoming paranoid in my old age, and I took the pill. Within 9 days, the fog set in. My hands trembled, holding a torque wrench I'd used 1,000 times. My legs felt filled with wet sand by 10 in the morning. I forgot the 4-digit code to my own gun safe, a combination I'd used for 15 years, standing there punching numbers with sweat breaking across my forehead while the lockout counter ticked down. I understood, somewhere under the fog, that they weren't trying to help my memory. They were erasing me on purpose. The turn came on a Sunday, 10 days in. Renee and Marcus came by with donuts, playing the part of the dutiful children checking on their fragile father. I was pouring coffee, letting my hand shake the way it had been shaking for real, when the mug slipped and shattered on the floor. I dropped to my knees to gather the pieces, keeping my head down, playing weaker than I felt. Renee went for the mop, and from my position on the floor, I caught Marcus's reflection in the glass of my china cabinet. He wasn't looking at me with concern. His face had twisted into pure, open contempt. He leaned toward Renee and murmured, low enough that he thought I couldn't hear it, "He won't last much longer like this." "Good." Renee didn't correct him. She just nodded and handed him a paper towel. Something in me went perfectly still and perfectly clear in that instant. The same stillness I used to feel walking into an interrogation room with a case already won in my head. I was not a fading old man. I was a target, and they had made the mistake of thinking I was already dead weight. I started spitting the pills into my palm and flushing them the moment Renee left each morning. Within 3 days, the fog began to lift. My hands steadied. On the 4th day, while the house was empty, I drove my old work truck, the one without GPS, 40 miles to a walk-in clinic outside Bowling Green where nobody knew my name, and paid cash for a full toxicology screen on the residue in that amber bottle. The doctor there, a tired man near retirement himself, called me the next afternoon with a voice tight with concern. The pills weren't vitamins. They were a high-dose antipsychotic, the kind used to sedate patients in acute psychiatric crisis, entirely wrong and dangerous for a healthy man my age. Sustained use, he told me, could mimic advanced dementia and, over time, could stop my heart. My own daughter had been poisoning me to make me look insane. I did not go to the police that day. I understood, from decades spent building airtight cases, that if I moved too soon, Marcus would call it a misunderstanding, and Renee would cry in front of a judge about her devoted concern for her confused father. I needed proof they couldn't talk their way around. I needed to catch them in the act. I still had contacts from my Marine investigator days, men who'd gone into private security work, men who owed me favors going back 30 years. I called one of them, a man named Ray Delgado, on a prepaid phone I'd bought with cash. Ray listened to the whole thing without interrupting, then went quiet in that particular way. Men like us go quiet when we're already 3 steps into a plan. "Walter, this isn't just theft," he said. "This is a fraudulent guardianship setup. They're building a paper trail to have you declared incompetent." He sent 2 of his people to my house that same night, professionals who worked in complete silence, wearing gloves, carrying gear bags that looked like nothing at all. They installed cameras no bigger than a pinhead into the crown molding of my office and my living room, wired to transmit encrypted footage straight to Ray's secure server, nothing stored locally for anyone to find. The installation nearly fell apart at 1 in the morning when my driveway sensor lit up. Renee's SUV was coming up the drive, unannounced, headlights off. I understood immediately, my stomach dropping, that she'd noticed I hadn't texted her that I'd taken my evening dose. I told the technicians they had 90 seconds. They vanished out the back window toward the tree line while I threw on nothing but a thin undershirt and walked out into 28-degree air, barefoot on the gravel, playing the part of a man lost entirely inside his own head. I called out for Carol into the dark. I asked Renee where our daughter had gone, why the house felt so cold, why the walls kept moving. It worked. Renee dragged me back inside, disgusted and convinced, cursing under her breath about how I was going to ruin everything if I froze to death on her timeline. She never once looked toward the living room, never noticed the faint dust on the hardwood or the slightly crooked picture frame hiding a lens. When she forced the night pill between my lips, I trapped it against my cheek and spat it into the sink the second her taillights disappeared down the road. Over the following 2 weeks, the cameras told me everything. I watched, from the tablet Ray had given me, as Marcus let himself into my office on a weekday afternoon, believing I was sedated upstairs. He went straight to the wall safe behind my father's old portrait, a safe only 3 people alive knew the combination to. He didn't fumble. He knew it cold, which told me Renee had given it to him, or worse, that I had, in some medicated haze I couldn't remember. He photographed every document inside, the deed to the shop building, the aerospace contracts, my retirement accounts, methodically, page by page, like a man building a case of his own. Ray's forensic accountants had been digging in parallel, and what they found turned my stomach in a way the poison never had. Marcus's consulting firm, the one he'd bragged about at every family dinner for 9 years, was hollow. No real clients in over 3 years. He was $2.4 million in debt, not to a bank, but to a private lending group out of Cleveland, known for breaking more than contracts when payments stopped. Marcus needed collateral, fast, and the only real asset in his life was my shop and everything attached to it. The forged documents he was photographing in my safe were his lifeline. He was using my life savings to keep men who did not send polite collection letters away from his door, and he was willing to have me declared legally incompetent to make sure I couldn't stop him. I understood then that this was no longer about a missing $110,000. It was about survival, mine and, in a strange, twisted way, theirs. I decided to force their hand before they could finish building their trap. I called Renee and told her, in a deliberately weak, halting voice, that I was having a clear morning and needed to talk to her about the shop's future. She arrived within the hour, wary. I told her I'd spoken with an estate attorney and decided to transfer the shop, the building, and everything tied to it into an irrevocable trust benefiting Toledo's Veterans Employment Program, effective that coming Monday. I watched the blood drain out of her face in real time. She begged me to cancel it, told me I wasn't thinking clearly, that Marcus had plans for the business. I told her my mind had never been clearer. She left in such a hurry she nearly clipped my mailbox on her way out. I had given them 48 hours. I expected them to come at me directly, maybe try to force my signature on something themselves. I underestimated how fast a desperate man moves when he's cornered. Friday morning, 8:15, I heard tires on gravel that weren't Renee's SUV. 3 county sheriff's cars pulled into my driveway, along with an unmarked county van. I watched from my kitchen window as deputies and 2 caseworkers from Adult Protective Services climbed out, moving like people who believed they were walking into a welfare check on a confused old man. They knocked, and I answered the door, letting my hands shake, letting my voice crack, playing the role I'd built for weeks. A caseworker named Denise handed me a stack of papers stapled together, an emergency ex parte guardianship order, granted in secret hours earlier by a county magistrate, stripping me of the right to manage my own affairs or even remain in my home unsupervised. Marcus had used forged affidavits from 2 out-of-state physicians, describing my supposed rapid mental collapse, physicians who had never once examined me. Renee arrived minutes later, sobbing with a precision that would have impressed me under any other circumstance, telling Denise how hard they'd tried to care for me at home. As deputies walked me toward the transport van in my socked feet, Renee stepped close under the guise of a goodbye embrace. Her lips brushed my ear. "Don't fight it, Dad," she whispered, cold as the morning air. "You lost. Go quietly and I might pick you a nice place." I let her feel my hands tremble. What she never checked, what none of them checked, was the small prepaid phone tucked inside the lining of my jacket, sewn there myself 2 nights earlier, with a needle and thread I hadn't touched since Carol taught me decades ago. I spent 3 days inside that psychiatric evaluation unit playing the part flawlessly, mixing up dates, asking for Carol, letting my hands shake on command, while every night I texted Ray from beneath my blanket. His forensic team had already traced Marcus's shadow debt straight to the Cleveland lending group. His investigators had gotten one of the 2 out-of-state physicians to admit, under threat of federal charges, that he'd been paid $30,000 to sign a blank affidavit, sight unseen. And the footage of Marcus opening that safe sat encrypted on a server 2 counties away, untouched and undeniable. By law, they had 72 hours to hold a formal hearing to make the guardianship permanent. Ray met me there. I was brought into that federal courtroom in the clothes Renee had packed for me, meant to humiliate me, faded work coveralls and my oldest boots, meant to make me look like exactly the broken old machinist she wanted the judge to see. I kept my head down, my shoulders slumped, shuffling my feet the way I'd practiced for weeks. Marcus and Renee sat at the plaintiff's table beside an expensive attorney from Columbus, all of them radiating the calm of people who believed the fight was already over. The attorney stood and delivered his opening with the smooth confidence of a man who'd never lost this kind of hearing, painting me as a man lost inside a collapsing mind, dangerous to himself, incapable of managing an estate worth millions. He played a video Renee had recorded of me barefoot in the frost calling out for my dead wife, and I watched the magistrate's face soften with genuine, misplaced pity. The magistrate finally addressed me directly, his tone gentle, practiced, the tone you use on the confused and the frightened. "Mr. Odom, I need you to look at me so I understand that you comprehend what's happening here today." I let 3 full seconds pass. I let Marcus and Renee sit in the warm bath of their almost certain victory 1 moment longer. Then I lifted my head, straightened my spine, and looked directly into that magistrate's eyes. His reaction was immediate and total. The color drained out of his face like someone had pulled a plug. His pen slipped from his fingers and clattered against his papers. He stared at me, blinking hard, like a man trying to wake himself out of a dream he didn't trust. "Wait," he said, his voice barely carrying, and then louder, cracking down the middle. "I know this man." The attorney from Columbus half rose from his chair, asking if the court needed a recess, if the respondent needed medical attention. The magistrate ignored him entirely, his eyes locked on mine. "You're Walter Odom," he said. "The Walter Odom. 22 years ago, my unit was under investigation for a supply theft ring in Kandahar. Everybody in that battalion believed I was going down with the guilty men. You were the investigator who spent 6 weeks proving I had nothing to do with it, when every officer above me had already decided I was finished." He set down the papers with hands that hadn't fully stopped shaking. "You saved my career and probably my life, and I have thought about you for 2 decades wondering if I'd ever get the chance to thank you." The courtroom had gone dead silent. Renee's hand had frozen halfway to her mouth. Marcus's confident posture collapsed inward like a tent, losing its poles. "Your Honor," the Columbus attorney tried again, his voice thinner now. We have sworn medical affidavits describing severe— Sit down, counselor, the magistrate said, and there was iron in it now. You have no idea who you've been standing across from. This man spent 6 years as a federal criminal investigator taking apart fraud rings twice as sophisticated as whatever you've brought into my courtroom today. He turned back to me, and his voice gentled again. But this time it was respect, not pity. The floor is yours, Mr. Odom, for as long as you need it. I stood the rest of the way up, and I felt every trembling, defeated pound I'd carried into that room simply fall away. Ray walked through the double doors behind me exactly on cue, 2 paralegals wheeling in a cart stacked with bankers' boxes, the wheels squeaking against the marble floor like a verdict of their own. I told the court that what stood before them was not a fragile old man's tragic decline, but the final act of a $2.4 million fraud. I laid the toxicology report on the bench first, the clean, clinical proof that the vitamins my daughter had fed me for weeks were an unprescribed antipsychotic capable of manufacturing every single symptom described in those forged affidavits. I told them about the physician who had confessed to being paid to sign blank paperwork under threat of federal perjury charges. Renee let out a small, broken sound, and for the first time since I'd walked in, she looked less like a predator and more like a woman watching the floor open beneath her own feet. Then I turned the courtroom monitor toward the bench and let the footage speak. Every eye in that room watched Marcus cross my office, open my father's safe with a combination he had no legal right to know, and photograph every document that mattered to my life, calm and methodical, a man robbing a house he believed was already his. I laid out the shadow debt next, the $2.4 million owed to men in Cleveland who did not accept apologies, the forged loan collateral documents built from those very photographs, the guardianship petition filed only hours before I would have signed the shop away to the Veterans Trust, timed with the precision of men trying to beat a clock they themselves had set. Marcus didn't wait for the magistrate to finish. He shoved back from the table so hard his chair toppled, and he ran, actually ran, down the center aisle toward the doors, some animal part of him understanding faster than his mouth could form words that there was no lie left that would save him. 2 bailiffs took him down before he reached the exit, and the sound of the cuffs closing echoed off the marble like something final. The magistrate revoked the guardianship on the spot, declared it void from its fraudulent inception, and ordered bench warrants issued for both Marcus and Renee before the session even closed, on charges that would eventually include elder abuse, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Renee tried to reach for me as the deputies came for her, tears streaking through makeup that had held up beautifully right until that moment. "Dad, please," she said. "I'm your daughter. I'm your blood." I looked down at her, and for just a moment I let myself remember the little girl who used to ride on my shoulders through the shop floor, laughing at the sparks flying off the grinder. Then I remembered the pill dissolving in my coffee, and Marcus's whisper in my own living room, and I felt nothing bend inside me at all. "You stopped being my blood the day you put that bottle on my counter," I told her, and I walked past her down that corridor without looking back, the sound of her voice fading behind the closing doors. 6 months later, Marcus was sentenced to 14 years on federal fraud and forgery charges. His firm liquidated. His debts to Cleveland, finally someone else's problem to sort out behind bars. Renee received 9 years in a state facility and lost every license and credential she'd ever built her name on. I reopened the shop under new management I trust, with my whole chest, men and women who earned it, and I established a fund through Ray's firm to help other seniors caught in exactly the kind of trap I nearly didn't walk out of, so the same laws that almost buried me could instead protect somebody else's father. I still go out to that shop most mornings, even though I don't need to anymore, just to hear the machines running and remember why my father built the place at all. Betrayal, I've learned, rarely comes wearing a stranger's face. It comes wearing the face you kissed goodnight for 30 years, hiding behind the very love it's using against you. You can forgive a person in your heart and still refuse to hand them the keys to your life ever again. An old lion resting in the shade hasn't lost his teeth. He's just waiting to see who's foolish enough to test them. If this story kept you here until the very end, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and let me know down in the comments what would you have done in my place. Claude responded, "Trust is a gift you give. not a debt someone else can collect on just by sharing your last name. Trust is a gift you give, not a debt someone else can collect on just by sharing your last name. Loving your children doesn't mean handing them the keys to everything you've built without ever checking the locks. Keep your eyes open, keep your heart soft, and remember that real strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's just quietly refusing to be fooled twice, while still choosing kindness for everyone who's earned it. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI, purely for entertainment, while hoping to leave you with a genuine, positive life lesson.